Ever wished you could, like, crack the stock market code? Find those hidden patterns, make those killer trades. Well, today we're diving deep into the story of a guy who kind of did just that.
We're talking James Simons.
Right, the one and only mathematician turned Wall Street wizard.
Heard he built his fortune using algorithms to trade way before it was, the cool thing to do.
Exactly. And we're going to break it all down using this awesome YouTube video from Curioso Mercado called O Matematico que Derrotou Wall Street.
That's the mathematician who beat Wall Street, for those who don't speak Portuguese.
Right. Now, this guy Simons, he wasn't your typical Wall Street hotshot, math whiz from childhood, loved puzzles, logic games, that sort of thing.
I read somewhere his doctor actually suggested he become, a doctor. For financial reasons, ironically enough.
Oh, the irony. But Simons had other plans. Took a wild motorcycle trip through South America with his buddies, then dove headfirst into academia.
It's pretty adventurous for a math guy, wouldn't you say?
Totally. And get this, he even tried his hand at code breaking for the government during the Cold War.
Now that's a story I'd love to hear more about.
Me too. Oh, and before all the Wall Street stuff, he actually dabbled in trading. Soybeans, of all things.
Soybeans, okay, that's unexpected.
Right. So even while he was deep in the academic world, he was kind of fascinated by the whole idea of predicting the market. Apparently, he made a decent profit on those soybeans at first.
Beginner's luck.
Maybe, but the market shifted and he ended up losing money.
So that's where the whole systematic, data-driven approach came in.
I think so. He realized that relying on gut feelings in such a volatile market, it just wasn't going to cut it.
Makes sense. So how did he go from math equations and code breaking to actually cracking the stock market?
Well, his work during the Cold War played a huge role. Deciphering codes, recognizing patterns, all those skills were essential for building the kind of predictive models he'd later use for trading.
I see the connection. He was basically training for Wall Street without even knowing it.
Exactly. And he wasn't satisfied with the traditional investment approaches either. He saw an opportunity to bring some serious math power to the game.
And that's how Renaissance Technologies was born, right?
Yep. And this is where things get really interesting. Instead of hiring the usual Wall Street analysts, Simons handpicked a team of mathematicians, scientists, all those brainiacs.
Talk about shaking things up. I bet that raised a few eyebrows on Wall Street.
Oh, absolutely. Back then, relying on pure math and algorithms was practically unheard of.
It's like he was saying, move over, suits. It's time for the numbers to talk.
Exactly. And they were serious about their data. I mean, there are stories about them going to the Federal Reserve and literally copying interest rate histories by hand.
Whoa. Dedication is an understatement.
Right. But it shows how much they valued having a solid foundation of data for their models.
They understood that garbage in, garbage out, as they say.
Totally. Now, we can't talk about Renaissance Technologies without mentioning the potato incident. Have you heard about this?
Oh yeah, the infamous potato story. Classic example of their algorithmic approach, or maybe a bit of algorithmic chaos.
So their system, designed to find those tiny market inefficiencies, it went a little haywire and started buying up tons of potato futures.
Like a ridiculous amount of potatoes, right? Almost cornered the market.
Pretty much. Regulators had to step in, shut down their trades, cost them a fortune.
Ouch. Expensive potatoes.
But it kind of highlights their whole philosophy. They weren't trying to predict the future or anything, just looking for those tiny short-term opportunities that their algorithms could exploit.
It's like they treated the market as a giant puzzle, constantly searching for those hidden patterns that no one else could see.
Exactly. So did they ever feel like they'd, fully cracked the code? Or was it more of a constant work in progress?
I think it was always evolving. Their approach was all about constantly testing, tweaking, and refining those algorithms, adapting to the ever-changing market.
It sounds like they were always on the move, never settling for good enough.
Right. They understood that markets shift, trends change, so their models had to keep up. Even with incredible success, there was always room for improvement.
That's a great mindset to have, especially in a field as dynamic as finance. Speaking of success, we have to talk about their flagship, the Medallion Fund, legendary for its insane returns.
Oh yeah, that's the stuff of Wall Street legend, averaging something like 66% annually for decades. Decades.
Mind-blowing, right? How did they achieve that level of consistency? I mean, that's got to be unheard of.
It all goes back to their relentless pursuit of pattern recognition. They saw trading as a long game, Understanding that consistent, small wins, driven by their statistical edge, would ultimately add up to massive success.
It's almost like they turned the stock market into their own personal casino, playing the odds in their favor.
In a way, yeah. But as the fund grew, they had to overcome new challenges, right?
Mm.
Like what happens when your trades start influencing the market itself? It's a bit of a paradox.
Right, because the more successful you are, the bigger your impact, and the harder it becomes to maintain that edge.
Exactly. And they had to get creative to solve that problem. They diversified across different types of assets, constantly tweaking their strategies to stay ahead of the curve.
Always adapting, always evolving. It's pretty amazing they managed to stay so successful for so long. But there's more to this story than just the numbers, right? I'm curious about the man behind the math, James Simons himself.
Well, he wasn't just a brilliant mind. He was also a master at building a unique culture at Renaissance Technologies. He brought together some of the brightest minds from all sorts of fields and really encouraged them to think outside the box.
So it wasn't just about the algorithms, it was about the people, too. Creating an environment where they could thrive and do their best work.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to delve into next time. We'll explore the culture at Renaissance Technologies, the challenges they faced, and the ethical questions surrounding their approach.
It's going to be fascinating to see how this all played out. Stay tuned.
Picking up where we left off last time, let's dig a little deeper into these algorithms Renaissance Technologies are using. Yeah, the specifics are still a bit of a secret, but we can make some educated guesses based on what we know about their team and their approach.
Yeah, like you mentioned machine learning and statistical arbitrage earlier. Could you maybe unpack those a little bit? For those of us who aren't quite math whizzes.
Sure. So
Yeah.
let's start with machine learning. Basically, it's all about teaching computers to learn from data,
Mm.
Without explicitly programming them.
So instead of giving a computer a set of rules, you just kind of feed it a ton of data and let it figure things out.
Exactly. You give it tons of data and let it find patterns and make predictions on its own.
So kind of like how we humans learn from experience, but on a much, bigger, faster scale.
Right. And when you apply that to the stock market, you can imagine feeding an algorithm like decades of historical price data, news events, economic indicators, maybe even weather patterns, like anything that could possibly influence stock prices.
And then the algorithm sifts through all that data and tries to find those correlations, those patterns that maybe us humans would miss.
Yeah, and that leads us to statistical arbitrage, which basically means finding tiny little price discrepancies and then exploiting them.
Okay, so can you give us an example of what that would look like?
Sure. Imagine you have two stocks that are usually correlated, they move together, right? But then suddenly one dips a little bit while the other one stays stable. That's a potential opportunity.
Because the assumption is that they'll eventually realign, so you buy the undervalued stock and sell the overvalued one.
Exactly. And these discrepancies can disappear really quickly, like in milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
So you need powerful algorithms and high-frequency trading to take advantage of them.
Okay, so we've got these algorithms making thousands, maybe even millions of trades every day. How do they manage all that risk? It seems like it would be really easy to spin out of control.
Yeah, risk management is super important in this kind of trading. And one way they probably managed risk was through diversification. So instead of betting big on just a few stocks, they spread their trades across tons of different assets.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And they also probably had really strict stop-loss orders in place. So if a stock started to drop too much, it would automatically sell and prevent those losses from getting out of hand.
That makes sense. So they were using these sophisticated mathematical models, not just to make predictions, but also to actively manage the risk that comes with their approach.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that all of this was happening way before we had the kind of computing power and data availability that we have today. Their early systems were pretty basic compared to what we have now, but they were still really pushing the boundaries of what was possible with technology.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling to think about the amount of data they were dealing with back then. But with all this talk about, algorithms and high-frequency trading, it's easy to forget that there were actual people behind all this. What was the culture like at Renaissance Technologies?
Well, Simons was really good at creating an environment that was both, super intellectual and also kind of playful. He hired all these brilliant people from all sorts of fields, not just finance.
Like, who are we talking about here?
Well, there were mathematicians, physicists, signal processing experts, even linguists and astrophysicists.
Wow, that's a lot of brain power in one room. So I guess that goes back to what we were saying earlier about the importance of interdisciplinary thinking. But how did he manage all those different personalities?
He really believed in having a flat hierarchy. So everyone, no matter what their background was, could contribute ideas. And he also really valued a sense of playfulness. Like he even organized treasure hunts for his employees with these really complicated math clues.
That's awesome. It sounds like he created a space where people could really, experiment, take risks, and challenge each other intellectually.
Yeah, it was definitely a culture that embraced unconventional thinking and exploration. It's almost like an academic environment,
Hmm.
but with the goal of making a ton of money.
And it obviously worked, but this whole approach, relying so heavily on algorithms and high frequency trading, it also raises some ethical questions, right?
Oh, for sure. Some people argue that these kinds of super fast automated trading systems can actually make the markets more unstable, more prone to sudden crashes.
And then there's the question of fairness. Like, do these systems give an unfair advantage to the people who have access to them? The ones with all the technology and resources.
Right. It's kind of like a new kind of arms race where the people with the most powerful algorithms have this huge edge over everyone else.
So there are definitely some potential downsides to consider.
Absolutely. And then there's the issue of transparency. Because these algorithms are so complex and secretive, it's really hard to understand how they work, let alone regulate them.
It's like this black box. We see what goes in and what comes out, but we don't really know what's happening inside.
Exactly. And that can be a little unnerving, especially when we're talking about something as important as the financial markets.
So what do we do about this, this whole issue of algorithms and high frequency trading? Is it something we should be worried about?
Well, I think it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Hmm.
On the one hand, we have all this incredible potential. These technologies can make the markets more efficient and innovative.
But on the other hand, there are these legitimate concerns about instability, fairness, and transparency.
Right. It's like this double-edged sword, and we need to figure out how to use it responsibly.
So it's not just about building smarter algorithms, it's about using them in a way that benefits everyone and doesn't create more problems than it solves.
Exactly. And that's a conversation that we need to keep having as these technologies keep evolving.
That's a great point. But before we get too deep into the ethics of algorithms, I want to circle back to James Simons for a second. He wasn't just a math genius and successful trader, he was also a philanthropist, right? Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into the world of James Simons and Renaissance technologies. We've covered a lot of ground, his unusual approach, the incredible success of the Medallion Fund, and some of the ethical questions surrounding their methods.
Yeah. Now let's take a step back and think about the bigger picture. What does Simon's story tell us about the future of finance technology, even our own approach to problem solving?
It's a big question. Where do we even start?
Well, I think one of the most obvious takeaways is that data is just becoming more and more important in every aspect of our lives, not just in finance. Simons and his team were pioneers in using data to get ahead in the market. But now we see data-driven decision-making everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. From healthcare to marketing to sports, everyone's talking about big data and analytics. It's like everyone's trying to find those hidden patterns and insights that will give them an edge.
Yeah, and that trend is only going to get stronger with AI and machine learning. We can process and analyze data on a scale that was just unimaginable a few years ago.
It's kind of like we're living in a world that Simons and his team helped create a world where algorithms are playing a bigger and bigger role.
And that brings up some really interesting questions about human judgment. In this data-driven world, are we eventually just going to let algorithms make all our decisions?
Or can we find a way to combine, human intuition with the power of data analysis? It's a tough question.
Right, it's a balancing act. And Simons himself has talked about how important it is to have human oversight. When we're developing and using these algorithms, he's emphasized ethical considerations and really understanding the potential consequences.
So it's not just about building smarter algorithms, it's about using them responsibly and making sure they're actually benefiting humanity.
Exactly. And that brings us back to those ethical questions we talked about before.
Yeah.
As these technologies become more powerful and more common, we really need to have a serious conversation about how to regulate them and make sure they're used for good.
It's like we're entering this new era, one that needs a whole new set of rules and ethical frameworks.
And it's not just about government regulation. It's about individual responsibility, too.
Yeah.
We all have a role to play.
So as consumers, we need to be aware of how our data is being used and demand more transparency from the companies that are collecting it, right?
Exactly. And as citizens, we need to be part of the conversation about the ethics of all this technology and push for policies that protect our privacy and make sure these tools are being used to benefit everyone.
It's a lot to think about, but Simons' story is a really powerful reminder that innovation isn't just about technology. It's about using that technology wisely and ethically.
It's a call to action for all of us, to think critically about the role of technology in our lives and to work towards a future where these tools empower us, not control us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So I guess the big takeaway here is that James Simon's story is more than just about financial success. It's about human ingenuity, ethical challenges, and our shared responsibility in shaping the future.
It's a story that makes us think differently, to embrace innovation, but also be mindful of the consequences and to use our knowledge and skills to make the world a better place.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. It's been a fascinating journey exploring the world of algorithms, high-frequency trading, and the brilliant mind of James Simons.
Absolutely. His story is a reminder that even in a world increasingly dominated by technology, human ingenuity and a commitment to ethical principles are more important than ever.
So to our listeners out there, keep asking those tough questions, keep exploring those uncharted territories, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Who knows, maybe you'll be the next James Simons revolutionizing your own field and leaving your mark on the world. Until next time, keep diving deep.